So Michael, everybody wants to get closer to their customers. Everybody wants to understand them better. But what's the challenge around that?
Again, that's a really interesting question. Everyone talks about customer centricity, but what is customer centricity? What does it actually mean? Having more data doesn't necessarily make you a customer centric business. What's important is that you consider the consumer, the customer, in every decision that you make within the business. You can only do that by having a high level of customer insight, a high level of segmentation that tells you not just their behavior, but also their need states and their motivations, so that when you're devising all of your solutions to create that customer centricity and have that impact, you're doing it with the customer at the heart of your decision-making process.
I know a lot of brands have sort of turned to big data to try and understand more about their customers, and it doesn't seem to have worked for a lot of them. What are the challenges around taking that data and making the interactions?
Yeah. I find it really fascinating that we as a community, if you like, of marketeers and analysts still talk about big data. What's important is not big data, but having the right data, having smart data. If you have too much information, too much insight, you create a paradigm of analysis paralysis where you're trying to constantly find that golden thing that's going to give you the answer. Actually, there are many studies that show that you can get 90% of all of your answers, probably from about 30 or 40% of the information. So find the key things that are going to make a difference to your understanding of your customer and leverage them in the marketing impact that you're trying to achieve.
What do you think brands struggle to understand what they need to understand?
Well, it's the Donald Roosevelt quote, isn't it? You don't know what you don't know. I think it's important that you look at not just what you're trying to find out, but how can you influence that. If I find out that a customer has a dog, for example, unless I can use that or leverage that certain piece of information in marketing, that information is of no value to me whatsoever. So what am I selling? How can I communicate? What are the levers that I have? Therefore, how can I influence that? And that's the information, the insight that you need to go and get hold of. So am I trying to get consumers to buy more from me, to buy more frequently from me, to spread what they buy and get them to buy into other departments or other products? What information would I need to know in order to understand why a customer, what is the barrier to them doing that, and how do I encourage them to move their spend from one of my competitors to myself? So again, I go back to the first point, which is understand what it is you're trying to achieve as a business, understand your capabilities. So can I do direct communications? Can I do, am I always on in terms of my communication? Can I do different types of initiatives that would be very bespoke to a customer? And once you work out the granularity of what you can do, then you can construct your insight around that requirement to make sure that they fit.
Good answer. And how, when we think about big data, when we think about understanding customers, it sounds like quite a long, laborious process. So how is that tied into sort of agile thinking and agile marketing?
Agile is an amazing word, and we've used it a lot to talk mostly around technology. So technology always has to be very agile because it has to be fast. It has to pull in the data from different bespoke legacy data sources in order to make it always available to the marketeer. Actually, we need to move away from that definition, move much closer to a definition of agile marketing. We as a business, we as consumers now are constantly being promoted to and engaged with, and we have the ability to always assess an offer, a promotion, a communication with your competitors. Therefore, from a marketing perspective, we have to be much more agile, much more fleet of foot. We have to respond more quickly, and not just in the technology, but in what we offer, how we respond, how we do our range development, how we do our price and promotions strategy. So agility now is more about marketing and less about technology.